Hello and welcome to the Property Trio, the podcast for the sophisticated property buyer. Today we have a special episode that was inspired by one of our listeners, Esther. And Esther asks us, please do an episode on regional Queensland and where you think the market will head, especially Townsville. How much more juice will be squeezed from that orange? So today we'll be exploring regional property markets and what you need to consider if you're thinking of investing in the regions. And we'll also be taking a closer look at Townsville. So without further ado, I'll welcome my two co-hosts, Mike and Cate. How are you both?
Great, Dave. Looking forward to seeing you.
You're in form today, Dave, already.
I reckon I'm a bit rusty, actually, I think, after a week off in New Zealand. But let's get into it. So Cate, let's start broadly. Why might investors consider looking beyond capital cities and into regional markets? What drives this interest?
Yeah, great question, because there are a few things that can drive investors' interest to pursue regions. Often it's affordability and cash flow, or one or the other. And I think about my early days as an investor, Dave, and I was on a very small salary when I was a graduate chemist. Everyone's heard me say all this stuff before, but it meant that my borrowing
It's always new listeners.
Yeah, well, it meant my borrowing capacity was impacted by that. And in addition, I needed to demonstrate to the lenders that I could generate a higher rental return at the time to get more borrowing. Now, things have tightened up with lenders. Now I know that they shave rental estimates and they don't necessarily award you with 100% of the rent that you're likely to get. But back when I started, some lenders did. So That's one reason why people turn to the regions. Another one is diversification, which I think is a great reason. And the last one is that if you are doing your research or you're led by someone who's research-based, you can have some really strong uplift. And I'm not suggesting that should be everyone's strategy, because volatility needs to be taken into account. I've seen regions that have been impacted negatively by changes as well. But what we have to remember with a region is you've got less people, less houses. And so something significant like a major employer or a new grant or a project being commenced in an area, attracting lots of workers, that can make a region really explode. And when I say explode, I mean do really well in the capital gains stakes. So I've seen some very impressive gains with much smaller purchase price tags. And that is one thing that regional experts will talk about. But like I said earlier, you've got to understand your market. You don't really want to go into something that's just got one main industry. You've got to think about how you insulate yourself. But I am certainly pro-regions when we think about how many great cities we've got around our nation. It's not just the capitals that we should be paying attention to. And on that little note, I want to pay some credit to Simon Presley, who has very generously shared some of his research with us. And Simon's one person that does look broadly at all markets.
Checks in the mail, Simon. Mike, do you have anything to add?
Well, I wish Cate wasn't so bloody eloquent, because then I might, Dave.
Yeah, just covered almost all the key points. We almost can wrap the episode up there.
Thanks for leaving me so much room. Look, I think our data has shown that the last, say, 2 years has all been about affordable markets. And Cate's absolutely correct. Diversification is part of it, but I think the bigger thing is affordability. And of course, the rental yields are higher, and that speaks to affordability as well. And you've got to remember the interest rate environment that we're in. It's difficult. Like, people are looking for returns. Yields matter in a way that they weren't mattering in 2020, for example. So, yeah, all of those reasons make regional property more attractive.
Yeah, that really good points, Mike. You did manage to add some gold on top of Cate's diamonds.
She made it tough. I just put a carpet on top of the diamonds.
Stop it.
So what? We probably touched on some of these already, to be honest, Cate. But we've probably already answered question number 2. But what are some of the key factors that investors should weigh up when considering regional areas?
I did read the questions. Yeah, I've got heaps more gold.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, one of the big ones.
I guess, yeah, comparing one regional area to another and
Yeah.
why you would select one over another.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, how far is it from you and how readily can you see to things? Because for me, a regional city like Ballarat, I can buzz up there and deal with minor renovations or improvements. Townsville, bit of a different story. I'm booking trades or flying up and staying there. So you've got to think about how you will manage and maintain your property. You also have to think about your demographic. What's driving the renters in that location to choose to rent, and what age group are they? What are they doing? Where's their employment? Sometimes it's homogenous, other times it's not. So you've got to be aware of who your target tenant is, because that will determine what sort of property you get and where it's located. Because as we all know, there's markets within markets, and the same applies to a regional city. And the next thing I'd say is think about the size of the city. The size of the city and what's supporting it, what its growth drivers are, because the smaller the city, potentially, the more volatile its performance could be, or the higher the risk that you could be taking in terms of downturns.
Yeah, some more great points there, Cate. Mike, dare I ask?
She's ruined it again. Can we get a less competent co-host, Dave, and then you and I'll feel more comfortable, perhaps?
So excited
Well,
about
do you know
this
what?
one.
How about we do an episode on depreciation very soon, Mike, where you get to do nearly all the talking?
You'll shine, mate.
That's a dream I can make come true for everybody. Perhaps a nightmare. Look, I want to pick up on that point about the trades. Like, I've had people sort of say before, I had to get a light globe change and I had to send out an electrician and it cost me like $500 and things like that. I think in some respects, like, you can sort of put a price tag of, say, $20,000 on that light globe. Like, people perhaps overstate how bad it is to have extra expenses in a remote location. But if that property market is doing 2% more than the other locations that are easy to drive to, a $20,000 light globe might kind of fit within the budget. But I mean, Cate is right. Like, there are certain times where a lot of work needs to be done, or a huge amount of maintenance. And there is certainly a value in being within a reasonable proximity to that. And Townsville, I mean, you can fly there, but I wouldn't drive from Melbourne, say. I think the other thing is that for me, it's about the population size and the diversity of employment. And I think it's really about jobs. And we'll share some data on jobs in Townsville. And that's one of the things that makes it a standout location around the country. And spoiler alert for the listener, the data is showing that it's still got legs. But I like to look at regional areas that don't have a population that's too small. Like, once you sort of get under, 30,000 people, there isn't necessarily a diversity of employers. And that is a kind of a small market where, Townsville, with a population of 200,000 there or thereabouts, I mean, that's a very diverse economy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a population size larger than Darwin. And it has a diverse economy, and we'll delve into that a little bit further as we go along.
It's the 14th largest city in our nation.
Yeah.
And I think so many people get this wrong when they think regional markets. They're thinking little mining towns or holiday hotspots. We've got some very big regions that are doing some really significant things.
Yeah, and, the needle can be moved more easily as well, and that's where there's that potential large upside for investors if they pick the right market and it has long-term sustainability. So, okay, there's some of the things to look for, some of the opportunities why people will look to purchase in regional locations. What are some of the pitfalls or downsides that our listeners should look out for?
Do you want me to answer?
I'm afraid to let...
Oh, stop it. You just do it, Bakos. You've got that look on your face.
Yeah, I'm just going to go for a walk around the block.
Look, one thing that we do have to bear in mind with regional markets is you've got lower incomes generally, and you've got lower price points generally. And, there's certainly a broader spectrum of price points in some regions. And so without knowing the areas really well, investors are absolutely at risk of picking a cheapie and finding that, they've bought in the Bronx and they've got a really tough tenant demographic to deal with. They've got, higher crime rate. They've got social issues that they might encounter, or they could find that they're bumping into affordability issues with renters, because as Dave's already said, the rents are higher, the yields are higher in most regions, and in regions that are being really pressed for housing, when you've got, for example, a new LNG project, and all of a sudden you've got these high income earners flooding the town looking for a roof over their head because they're working. Well, it forces rents up, and it pushes the people that have been there for a long time, particularly the vulnerable people, out into fringe areas. And so you've got to be very, very careful about the areas that you target if you're looking for a low maintenance property with a low maintenance renter and a constant rental return. Because if you're not getting a low maintenance renter and they're hitting affordability constraints, you might find that you're then dealing with rental arrears, and it's hard when you're interstate and you've got a property manager you might not know really well, and you can't just rock around and have a coffee with them and workshop it. It can be very stressful. And then you look at your portfolio and you think to yourself, I've got these lower price point properties that are causing me more stress. And I speak from experience.
Yeah. So you could actually make a case that it's more important to spend extra time on selecting a quality asset in a regional location. There's less, I guess, margin for error, if you like, because the location is obviously a lot smaller, and you might end up with a lot more headaches if you do get that wrong.
1,000%. It's absolutely true. And I'm not suggesting that you go for the top quartile necessarily, but gee, if you do, you'll probably be rewarded with a great tenant experience, a really lovely property that will continue to, attract aspirational purchase type activity in the area, and your chances of getting capital growth will be significantly higher. So I always say to people, if you're targeting a regional area for affordability, have a really good focus on the median values and make sure that A, you can afford it, and B, you like what you're seeing. Because if you go for the bottom quartile or the bottom decile, you'll have a good storybook to write, but you'll be tearing your hair out on a regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah. So lean into the higher end of the market more so if you're looking into, or median to higher end if you're looking into a regional location, which generally one of the reasons you might be doing that is because of affordability factors to begin with. So, Mike?
Well, as far as I'm aware, we were the first people to publish the average distance that investors live from where they buy their investment property. I haven't seen it elsewhere. And the first time we did it, it was over 250 kilometres, and it's peaked over 1,500 kilometres in our data in recent months. But what we were sort of trying to do there is attack the notion that, investors aren't sophisticated and they buy around the corner from where they live. I think that was kind of disproven, but there is a comfort from buying around the corner from where you live. Like if you just think about your location, if I was to parachute myself in there, I might go, oh, this is a nice street, or this is a nice suburb. And you would go, oh, no, you would never buy in there because this happens, or there's this particular reason, or, the water level comes up to your neck, if there's a 1 in 5 year flood sort of thing. And Townsville's a great example of that. I mean, it does have its flood zone. So you've got to understand that location. When you are going to a region that's not familiar to you, you either need to rely on someone that knows that area intimately, or you have to really get your hands dirty and do the research yourself.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, really good points. All right. So, look, that's a really good insight into how to approach investing in our region. So maybe if we zoom in on Townsville for a moment.
Do you mind if I share one more little point?
Yeah.
Understanding your trade availability, you touched on it, but when you're in the regions, it's not just the cost that you might be incurring with trade work. I tend to find sometimes it's much higher, especially if there's a shortage and there's a surge of investment activity. Tradies, sometimes they're just really stretched. Other times they get cheeky and they know they can put their prices up. You also have to think about timing. I remember years ago organising building inspections and that kind of thing in the regions in Ballarat. You couldn't just get a builder same day or the next day like you can in Melbourne. They've got to factor in more travel time because a regional building inspector is probably covering lots of other adjacent regions as well. And so when you're going into an area and you're throwing out an offer and you're putting in tight time-stamped offers, or you're having tight clauses to try and enhance the strength of your offer, just make sure you can get a building inspector in 3 days if that's the clause that you're using, because sometimes you're waiting up to 2 weeks. I've recently had an experience in Gladstone, of all places. Getting a building inspector within 2 weeks is really tough up there. So buyers need to think about timing and cost of trades. They really should ask questions before signing contracts.
Yeah, and I guess that sort of flows into as well, if you're not able to fly up there and you need to rely on your property manager to maybe organise some of the trades, you need to select your property manager well and, have a lot of trust there that they're going to be able to support you in that area, and also ensure that you're paying local rates and not interstate rates.
Yeah.
On that, Dave, and maybe just to take the pressure off you as host to segue into Townsville, I mean, I had written on my sheet trades, etc. for that question, and roughly would have said what Cate said, I'm certain. But one thing that makes Townsville fantastic is that it has $12 billion worth of committed projects and quite a pipeline of likely projects. And what that has kind of translated into is the job opportunities that we talked about. But the trades are busy working on the projects. They're not working on construction.
Great point.
And and the supply of new housing in Townsville is very, very constrained. And these are all things that will put fire under the market. But when you do actually need a tradie to fix something on your property, it's that double-edged sword.
Yeah, look, it's actually a really good point in that it's a microcosm of the macro issue with Australia, isn't it? With all the infrastructure work and all the government expenditure, and the fact that we actually don't provide visas to skilled tradesmen because of pressure from unions, so we can't build enough houses. And that's really playing, that obviously you've just shared some data, how that's playing out, probably on a much greater level, though, than in Townsville, but it's a story across the country on some level as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think Simon sort of described it as the top from a per capita construction project pipeline, which is an interesting way of looking at it, because it's easy to look at Sydney and go, we've got $100 billion worth of projects, but maybe the equivalent in Townsville of $20 billion worth of projects is actually a lot bigger.
Is bigger, yeah. It's the tip of the spear for Australia with that issue. All right. So as I just touched on before, we started to a little bit zoom in on Townsville for Ester. It's a coastal city in northeastern Queensland. It's got a population, if we touched on, of around 200,000. Now, interestingly, in the last, between 2016 and 2021, its population growth rate was 7.85%. So that was less than Australia's population growth, and also Queensland. So it didn't necessarily have a huge influx or above average influx of people to it.
But it does. That's not counting FIFO as well, which is really interesting. So you can have more people inhabiting the city, but they're not necessarily permanent residents there.
True. Yeah, we don't have the numbers, and if FIFO has grown exponentially or at a larger percentage than the rate of population growth over that 5 years or not. As I think you've already mentioned, Cate, it's the 13th or 14th largest city. So for a bit of perspective there, it's only slightly behind Hobart and Geelong in terms of its population size, but it is a larger population than, say, Cairns and Darwin, which just fall behind it, which actually makes it the fourth largest city in Queensland. So Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, and then you've got Townsville, and it is the largest urban centre in northern Queensland. What also makes it quite important is it is the largest port in essentially northern Australia, and how they define that is above the Tropic of Capricorn, which is sort of the line that runs through about 2/3 of the way up. So it's a busier port than Darwin, for example, and any other mining related port on the northern side of Australia. So that it's bringing in materials such as zinc, copper, lead, sugar, and various other commodities. So it does have a lot going for it. Mike, can you please share some of the economic and employment drivers of Townsville?
I would love to, Dave. Mining is at the top of my list, although when drilling into the data, mining only represents 3% of Townsville's workforce. Health is actually number one at 18%, and it's pretty diverse as well. But obviously, it's a huge resource kind of bowl for all sorts of things, and there's quite a lot in potentially committed projects in the next little while. One particular mine, I think, has got a $2 billion price tag on it. Mining services like refining and shipping makes a dent as well. The defence presence in Townsville is a big one. There's 2 battalions that are going to be relocating to Townsville. I mean, that's, I think, 500 personnel or thereabouts, but there's quite a lot of infrastructure that goes with, just an average personnel member of an army battalion. It's a bit like Formula One, like there's one driver, or maybe there's 2 drivers in a team, but there's kind of like 400 people following them behind. So obviously the army base is the big one. That's the biggest one in Australia. There's the RAF base as well. Obviously, that's a big, important strategic base because Australia's a bloody big thing to try and look after and protect. There's a lot of surveillance activities and those sorts of things. There's government services hubs, research institutes, and probably one of the big ones is James Cook University, which is a fairly big university that's kind of unique to northern Queensland, but of course has a big campus there in Townsville. So that's just a bit of a tip of the iceberg on some of the stuff that's there.
Got medical as well. They've got a good hospital there in Townsville, and they attract a lot of nearby places around the region. So
18% of the workforce being in health is an interesting one. It'd be sort of interesting to contrast that to other regions. Off the top of my head, I wouldn't know how others would compare, but it does sort of seem like a big chunk.
Yeah, well, it is it's a really good point. It is the region's centre, like for northern Queensland, it's the healthcare hub, if you like, and it has the major hospital, and so people come from a long way to Townsville to be looked after.
Yeah.
So
and they cop a lot of medevac activity as well.
Yeah. So, and look, we also know tourism plays a big part in the Queensland as a whole and the Townsville economy, and Townsville has a beautiful foreshore known as the Strand. It has the Ross River Parklands, the Barra Fun Park, which I'm sure plenty of families will know about. It's a short ferry ride to Magnetic Island. It holds some national based sporting events like the V8 supercars. It actually has a team in the National Rugby League competition, the NRL, which is the northern
Cowboys.
the North Queensland Cowboys. So one of only 3 teams or 4 teams now in the state of Queensland in the NRL. It's also close access to the Paluma, if I've pronounced that correctly, Range National Park. So plenty of tourism going on there. And what about Townsville as a city? Let's share some of the information there, guys. Now, I'll just give a quick overview, high level. So Townsville is made up of approximately 40 to 50 suburbs. Some of the more prominent suburbs include North Ward, which is close to the Strand and popular beach areas, Kerwin, which is one of the major residential suburbs, Douglas, which is home to the university and the hospital, and Aitkenvale and Hermit Park are large commercial and residential hubs. And look, just high level before we dig into some of this in a bit more detail. Basically, the city of Townsville had been going backwards in terms of property values from about 2012 until 2019 when COVID hit. And then it's essentially been on a rise ever since. It was the top performing location in Queensland last year with 25.8% growth. So by contrast, Brisbane's had growth of about 13.5%. Gladstone was second highest at 25.2%. And then it fell a fair way back to the third largest growth location in Queensland of Burnett at 18.8%. But for a bit of perspective, the property values only got back to 2012 levels in the last couple of years. And so hence that's why there's been probably a fair bit of outperformance in Townsville. But what would you both like to share on that front in terms of, I guess, Esther's question, how much more juice can be squeezed from the Townsville orange?
I don't think we've seen the end of it by any stretch. Over the last 5 years, they've had a 21.5% increase in jobs, which is massive. That's a very, very big figure. I don't think we can underestimate the defence force and the role that Townsville plays either. And for anyone who didn't know, in 2025, they're introducing 2 new full battalions to Townsville, and that'll bring 500 new permanent residents, and that's a significant number. And I think as our defence continues to grow, it's interesting.
As we invest more in defence, which most nations are, and obviously the north part of Australia is closer to areas where potentially we see possible threats.
Yeah. And I think what we have to look at, obviously jobs creation is a big one. The driver of that is projects and employment. They've got a lot going on. Simon Presley has delved into the detail of this, and it's incredible. In fact, we'd need a 2-hour pod to cover one press release of his. But there's a lot of money being spent on varying projects. They're not all necessarily energy related or sporting related. It's a real blend. But when you combine that with the activity that the Defence Force is creating, there's a lot of work in store for a long time and growing numbers of jobs in Townsville. I can't see this just fizzing out over the next few years. I think that they're going to ramp up a workforce and need more people and have a lot of well-paid employment for some years now, and it looks like the number of jobs will continue to increase. Now, housing's really tight. It's obviously limited. It's a big regional city with only so many houses that have been constructed. And as you said, Mike, when you've got all of your tradies that are focusing on big build projects, it makes it very hard to keep housing construction ticking over. So I see the issue of a housing shortage getting a little bit thicker in Townsville as well. And while that's horrible news for renters, it's great news for investors. So I don't have any concerns about the longevity of Townsville's performance.
A bit like Perth being, such a huge performer on a numbers basis. It's because it did nothing for quite some time and, went backwards for periods and had 14 years of really flat sort of growth overall. Yeah. Townsville's sort of the same. It's playing a little bit of a catch-up. So it begs the question, do you have to have an exit plan? I think it's something worth thinking about. But the data kind of points to it having long-term fundamentals. Like to quote Simon, Townsville's produced the biggest job increase in Australia over the last 4 years with job volumes 3 times the national average. So if you look at 4 years to October 2023, it's 25.3%. You compare that to Brisbane at 11.3, Perth at 14.1, Melbourne 5.9, and Sydney 7.2, and it's actually backwards in the CBD. Those numbers mean something, and I think population really gets overstated as a driver of house prices, but we are seeing a population increase and a decrease really in home construction on the previous sort of trend. So all of those things point to me as fundamentals that aren't going to disappear overnight. So I think that Townsville probably has legs for quite a few years to come.
Yeah, look, that's the big question for me as well, is it sustainable? Is it a location that won't have those big peaks and troughs anymore? Does it have enough underlying diversity in the economy, the jobs, the different industries that will sustain consistent performance. And it's these numbers are starting to look like that's probable, but we can't ignore history. We ignore history at our peril, I believe. So I think that's a good point you make, Mike, that if you might just want to watch what's happening at the market and be willing to have an exit strategy if the signs are there that you could be in for an extended plateau of property values like has happened historically. But even that's hard to predict in time, isn't it? Like, it's been 1 year, 2 years flat. Do we get out now? 3 years flat. Oh, is it going to go for 7 years like last time, or what's going to happen? So, all right, very good. Is there any, before we move into our gold nuggets, is there anything else you'd like to share on Townsville?
It's a lovely place to visit. Like, there's something to be said for experiencing the city and also its climate. I know some people who don't like stinking hot, humid weather won't love the hot months in Townsville, but geez, it's a pretty place.
I've never been.
Oh, well, we can make a road trip of it.
I would love that. Yeah, I mean, like it looks like a pretty happening place. Yeah. Send us on a road. We need some sort of sponsor. But,
shout out to anyone who'd like to sponsor us to
do a series.
Do a series of shows in your city. All right, very good. Well, on that note, we'll move to gold nuggets.
Now it's time for us to go mining for our gold nugget property tip of the day.
My gold nugget, I'll make this a two-parter if you'll allow it. Firstly, you've got to make sure that Townsville or any other region kind of fits with your strategy. Why are you investing? What is the point of it? Is it, passive income at X years? Is it to grow your equity as fast as you can in the shortest amount of time? So you've got to do that work. But I think for me, the biggest risk with Townsville is that the word's already out, the horse is already bolted. Now it begs the question, well, how much has this horse got to bolt? And I know nothing about equine physiology, but I do know a little bit about property markets. And the challenge will be that there are already a lot of people and already a lot of buyers agents that are representing a lot of people transacting every day in and around Townsville. So what you've got to make sure is that you are able to source a property at a reasonable price that's going to give you that upside potential. But with so much competition in and around Townsville at the moment, it's a tricky thing to navigate, and no one really ever cares more about your money than you. So if you are engaging an expert, I would be having a frank conversation about the heat within the market and how to make sure that you're not just overpaying so that person gets the deal done.
Great point, Mike. And we do know that most markets overshoot on the way up as well. So there tends to be at least some sort of correction on the downside. So that's something to always be conscious of. Cate?
Yeah, I love a good regional investment story. Everyone knows that. But I think the requirement to know the city really well, to understand the growth drivers first and foremost, to understand the vulnerabilities of the area, and then to know the area inside out. So which streets are good, which are dodgy, where are you likely to attract trouble? What do the property managers in the area say? And what sort of housing and styles of dwellings are the key tenants looking for? If your advisor doesn't know all this stuff inside out, you've probably got the wrong advisor. But what I do love about a good regional investment, especially for someone who's buy and hold for the long term, is it can deliver really well when that's your strategy. Your holding costs are generally lower. So your out-of-pocket costs, you're not dealing with a price point at $2 million like you would in a Sydney or a Melbourne market. You're dealing with something significantly lower. And, of course, you're getting higher rents. So while the bank might not get excited about your rents and necessarily give you further borrowing capacity, that makes a big difference to your bottom line. So a well-thought-out investment strategy for someone who is buy and hold long-term, I think there's absolutely a place for regional cities.
Great nugget, Cate. Well, that brings us to the end of this special on regional locations, which Cate has been magnificent in providing
Best on
all
ground.
her best on ground, 3 votes, all her significant knowledge too, and Mike's also managed to chime in here and there with
It's the ball boy picking up the rubbish thrown on the
Big
field.
thanks to Simon. He's a lovely buddy and he's very generous with his intel. So, Simon, we really appreciate
some good insights
some
from
of that
Simon
insight.
as well.
100%.
Yep. All right. Well, until next week, we'll see you soon.
See you
See you then.
then.